All right.
Uh-oh, I hope.
Good evening, West Hollywood. My name's Max Geschwind.
And I'm Daniela Rudoy, and this is WeHo Politics.
Now tonight on our show, we have Heidi Shink, one of the 4 candidates running in the City Council special election on June the 2nd. Heidi, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's a privilege. Thank you
you.
so much. Now, just to get the folks at home an idea about your credentials and your experience in the city, you currently sit on the Planning Commission.
Correct.
And you used to serve on the Human Services Commission.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
Yep.
And you've been living in the city for many years, fighting for LGBT rights.
Correct.
Over 25 years.
Even longer
Right.
than you were alive.
30. So it's great to have you on the show. We
Thank
appreciate it. So now we're just going to get started, start talking about the issues facing this election. So
Excellent.
Daniela.
Okay, so the first question, just kind of to introduce yourself to the audience, just tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you came from, your educational background, and how that compelled you to be so involved in, politics and public affairs. And
So I started life in New York, and I came out of the closet when I was 17 years old. And when I came out, my folks kicked me out of the house. And I lost my whole family overnight. Wait, it has a happy ending, so we've since reconciled. I sort of gave away the end of the story. But so at 17, I was on my own, and I moved into Manhattan, and because I was from New York. And I found myself needing to find a way to take that homophobia that was coming this way from my family and making it meaningful and push it that way, right? So if I internalized it, I knew that I would be in trouble. Like many of our LGBT youth, they turn to suicide. There's a lot of self-loathing, drugs, things like that. I decided to push it outward and try and change hearts and minds. So I got very involved with political action at the time. That seemed like the logical place to find my voice. And I got involved with an organization that was very big in the 80s called ACT UP. And it was one of the first LGBT organizations that was very effective, very theatrical, and this was the days before social media, very good at organizing and getting people to hear our message before there was a way to get message out on a wide scale. So that was sort of my entree into politics. And because it helped truly save my life at the time, I knew that I needed to keep giving back after I had reconciled with my folks and really gotten on my feet. I knew that that's where I belonged. That's where change happens.
Right. What moved you out here to West Hollywood?
Well, New York sort of didn't feel like home.
Right.
So I was looking, when my parents kicked me out, I was looking for a place to take me in. And I always say that when my folks kicked me out, West Hollywood took me in, because West Hollywood gave me a home.
Right.
New York was where I had to be because it was where I was born, but it didn't feel like a place that I could really find community and recreate a family after my family had rejected me because of my sexual orientation, and find acceptance, safety, all of these things. And at the time, there were very few places in the country, like West Hollywood, where you could actually be LGBT or be anything that really was sort of outside of the box. West Hollywood doesn't just attract LGBT folks. It attracts what I call magic makers. And so it's people who don't quite fit in and want a place. Maybe you're an artist, maybe you're a lawyer, whatever it is, but you want a community full of people who are creative thinkers. And I needed a place to call home. So when they kicked me out, I went searching, and West Hollywood just embraced me. And I've stayed ever since.
That's so
awesome.
nice.
Yeah.
That's so lovely. Well, West Hollywood certainly is a remarkable and flourishing city. We live in a diverse community that has the LGBT community, but we also have immigrants from Soviet Union, people with disabilities, senior citizens, and on top of that, economically, we have a AAA bond rating and a budget surplus. So how would you, if you were elected to the city council, how would you build onto the greatness that the city already has?
Well, many ways. There's actually as much good as we have in the city. It's easy to look back at what we've done. I want to look forward to what we can do.
Right.
And I think that we actually are facing some very critical issues. The city at its birth had sort of had one phase, and now we just turned 30. So we're no longer at the birth, we're a mature city. And as a mature city, we have different problems than we had when we were birthing, just like a child, if you will. We're sort of in graduate school, or maybe a little bit older. And the things that we're facing now are problems of reckless development. It's pushing a lot of our renters out of their homes. We're facing traffic problems that are getting consistently worse. Anyone that comes to West Hollywood knows exactly what I'm talking about. Parking has become punitive in the city, and that's shuttering a lot of our small businesses. So as good as we're doing, we also have to look at the problems that we're facing. And the solutions to those problems have not been helpful by previous city councils, because they've been getting consistently worse. More people have been LS'd out of their homes or evicted from rent-controlled units all over the city in the last 10 years than the previous 20 years. So we were, by the way, founded as a rent-control city, so that's almost egregious to me. So we're facing actually some very, very critical problems. It's easy to see the good in our AAA bond rating. We want to protect that, and we want to protect our fiscal health. But by the same token, if we lose what makes West Hollywood, I actually think it will impact our fiscal health. If we lose our brand, which is that we're a haven for magic makers, if we get overrun by overdevelopment, all of these things, if traffic impedes people from coming to our city because they say, I could go someplace else and I just don't want to sit in that pile up, or they don't want to look for parking places that they simply can't find. So if we don't actually start finding solutions to those problems, it's going to impact us fiscally. So when I think about the city, I think of it both as the idea of the city and the beautiful idea of the city, and preserving that, and also preserving the fiscal health of the city. And those two things, I think, go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned traffic as being one of the biggest problems that we face here in West Hollywood.
Sure is.
So I agree.
You sat me coming here.
So, what are some solutions that you have been thinking of to, aid in this problem, and just pedestrian safety and all of that? And how do you plan on fixing that?
Those are intertwined, but two separate questions in a sense. So I'll take them both separately. For traffic, first of all, a lot of people, they say one of two things about West Hollywood traffic. Mm-hmm. Either they say it's a regional problem, and that's partly true, or they say this is the best we can do. And I sort of disagree with both, because I think that we could still be leaders and implement solutions that will have an impact on our traffic, notwithstanding the fact that we still are a sort of a pass-through city. Mm-hmm. That does depend on our regional the cities that border us. But I think that if we lead, and I'll tell you how in a second, that they will follow suit. I want to bring 21st century data-driven solutions to the city, which has been sorely missing. I mean, some of our systems are so antiquated, they literally were put in place before you guys were born. And as you know, technology has changed, probably in the time that we've talked. Technology has changed. Someone in Silicon Valley has created something new. So West Hollywood is not only lagging behind, we're not even in the game. And one of the things that I would love to bring to the city are these, this is directly for traffic, are these very cool sensors that you can put subterraneanly inside all our main thoroughfares. And what it does is it picks up a very, very wide circumference of the picture, the real-time picture of what's going on the ground. Not just with cars, not just with pedestrians, but with dogs, baby carriages, people who are in wheelchairs, people who have shopping carts, whatever the real-time picture is, and it instantaneously beams to the traffic lights, so that the traffic lights are actually responding to real-time conditions in real time, instead of there being a lag like there is now. And our systems do not pick up all that data and information. So we're living in the information age, and yet we're not utilizing technology that can actually help us. Now, this technology has been implemented in cities across the world. So it's cost effective and it improves the quality of people's lives. So this is the kind of forward thinking that I want to bring to council that will have such an impact not only on our city, but on our regional sister cities as well. And I can guarantee that if we could show the kind of reduction that, let's say, London, who actually, one of the most traffic cities in the world, actually implemented this system, they showed a 10 to 20% reduction in traffic during peak hours, and during off-peak hours, 30 to 40%. So, right, it is a wow.
Yeah.
So even if we look at it conservatively, let's say it's 10%, wouldn't you be happy if you had 10% less traffic
Yes.
coming here? So would the people that live, work, and play here. And I can guarantee that our sister cities would then say, hey, look at what West Hollywood is doing. They're leading, right? They're showing the success, and they're showing that it's cost effective. And once we do that, I can guarantee that they would follow suit. And now all of a sudden that regional problem that we're having, instead of it compounding the problem, right, it's actually alleviating the problem. And then it just spreads. And I hope it spreads all the way from downtown to Santa Monica.
Right.
I'm just thinking about it from like a fiscal point of view, but how much would this technology cost, and where would we get this money, and just like the financial
Right.
part of it?
Yeah, in London, it was actually very, very cost effective, which was sort of the beta city. We are a 1.89 square miles. So we're a teeny city. And we'd probably do it, I would say, on Melrose, Santa Monica, and Sunset, and see how it worked, or even start with one and see how it worked. Let's say Santa Monica, which is our main street, let's say. So the cost of it is, it's very cost effective. Remember that as technology gets better, the price has always dropped. Think about our first computers, again, before you were born. I think it's the third time I've said this because you guys are so young. But the first computers were $10,000, and now you could get a cheap computer for $300 or $400, that does much more than what the first computers ever did. So as technology grows and these systems have been implemented across the world, they've gotten less and less costly. So, but I also have to think about what the cost of the quality of living is. So if the cost is that people don't want to come to our city, or they don't want to live in our city, or they don't want to work in our city because of the traffic pileup that you encounter at all times during the day and night, I mean, it's actually surreal. It just doesn't matter what time of day it is. There's just always traffic in West Hollywood. That fiscal impact and the impact to people's quality of life is so high that I think that we can afford to do it. It just so happens that the particular system that I'm talking about is extremely cost effective. However, I'd have to talk to my fellow council people, and we'd have to investigate, is this the only system we want to look at? I don't want to mention the brand because I'm not an advocate for a particular brand, but there is one that I have in mind, and it's the one that was used in London. However, there are others like it, so we would look at it as a council and then make a decision on which one would work the best and then implement it. And these wouldn't be things that I would want to take a year or 2 years to study. The studies have been done, the proof is there, they work. The great thing about the fact that we have new people on council is that new, fresh thinking brings new, fresh ideas. And we have just, the previous council and the people that have sat there have sort of thrown up their hands and said, this is the best we can do. And I say that we could do better. I know we can.
Yes. All right, well, we're going to talk a little bit about development, which is, of course, one of the biggest issues facing the city, if not maybe the biggest. There tends to be a conflict recently as we're progressing as a city between creating more development, building more construction projects, yet also trying to preserve historic buildings such as Fiesta Hall in Plummer Park. So how would you govern if elected to resolve the conflict between those two areas?
Well, first of all, overdevelopment, we're being overdeveloped to death.
Right.
Everywhere you look, there's a new crane, there's, going up, erecting some monolithic structure. There is, a house, a single, family house, which used to be predominantly what the city was made of, being torn down. Historic structures are at risk. Apartment buildings with rent control are at risk. it's a disaster, actually, because we're becoming something other than West Hollywood, in my opinion. And we used to be an urban village, and we're becoming sort of a concrete slab, if you will, and or valley. I think people are calling it a concrete canyon. And whatever the word for it is, it stems from how we use our land. And really everything stems from how we use our land. Traffic stems from that, parking issues stem from that, our water shortage stems from that. So overdevelopment is the issue of this election, and we must get a handle on it. One of the things that I worked on was with, there were other folks involved in a great way, but that I was part of was what was called a neighborhood overlay zone, which is a technical way of saying that the residents were dictating to developers rather than developers dictating to residents what they want from their neighborhood. This was implemented in West Hollywood West, so only one part of the city. We have, let's say, 7 distinct neighborhoods we have more districts than that, but let's say 7 distinct neighborhoods. And when on council, what I would do is actually take the success of this neighborhood overlay zone, which, by the way, the residents were happy, the developers were happy, because now they're not getting pushback on their projects anymore. They know exactly what's expected of them. And the city is happy because they don't have to litigate between angry residents and frustrated developers, right? So it was a win-win-win all the way around. I would love to take that model and then implement it not citywide, but neighborhood by neighborhood, and let each neighborhood say, this is what we want from development. We'll bring the developers to the table, the residents to the table, the city to the table, have that conversation, just like we did with West Hollywood West, perfect success, and then implement it again across the city, neighborhood by neighborhood. And I can guarantee you that the relief amongst all the parties will be great when the residents are heard, which is my most important concern, when developers are playing by the rules that we've set for our own city, and where the city doesn't have to be sort of in the middle or taking sides. And in the past, the side that they've taken has been for development and for developers. And I want to bring back a residents' council. We've been sort of under the grip of, I've called it a developers' council. It's time for it to be a community council again.
That's good. We just, you kind of mentioned keeping residents happy and having that whole sense of community. We go to high school in the area, but we go to Fairfax. Cool. And we noticed
right by where I live.
And we noticed that as elementary school kids, they stay in West Hollywood. It's more family oriented. But as the kids get older, middle school, high school, families tend to move out of West Hollywood and into, cheaper areas, more, I don't want to say, family friendly areas
like in the valley.
The valley, that's also cheaper. So we don't have a lot of West Hollywood kids going to high school in West Hollywood. So how
and we don't have a West Hollywood high school, so.
Right. Well, Fairfax is the main high school for people living in the area.
Yeah, but how would you want to increase the size of families that live in West Hollywood, and how would you bring them here?
Make it more affordable for families to live.
Yeah, I think affordable housing, again, is one of it's tied in with development. Yes, the answer to the question is unequivocally, we have to make this an affordable city. When we stop being a place that people who need a place to go because they think outside of the box, and by the way, being a family could be thinking outside of the box, right? There's no definition except for your own. To me, the people that come to West Hollywood are people who want to be their best and their most authentic selves. And this is a place where they have freedom of expression, whatever that happens to mean on the spectrum, right? And we're a very, very diverse community, and interestingly, we get along really, really well. In a lot of other communities across the country, when you have that kind of diversity, there tends to be tension. Right. And that doesn't exist in our city, and that's a testament to West Hollywood. So if we lose that and we become homogenous and we don't make room for a changing demographic, that to me, again, is us failing the residents. And I think that the city can have a part in that. First of all, we can do things like make parks more family-friendly. We can think about our own school system. Again, that's something that we would have to talk about on council. We can encourage programs. When I was on the Human Services Commission, I really pushed for, along with my other commissioners, increasing funds for the changing demographic, because we're not the city that we were 30 years ago. And I think that's why we need new faces on council, because when you have new eyes looking at new demographics, you're going to come up with new solutions for what the future is of West Hollywood. It's very easy to look back at what you've done and rest on those laurels. It's much harder to dig in and say, what am I going to do? And this city is actually changing, and it's changing rapidly. So we want people to stay. We don't want them to have to go to other cities to find home. This was their home before they left, but they felt that somehow it wasn't working for them, whether it was fiscally or there weren't enough services to provide for either if it's a family or whatever it is. So I would look at those demographics, and I know what those demographics are, and then provide services and the kind of infrastructure that would actually support this wonderful evolution in our city and actually make it friendly, whether you're a family or not, whether it's dogs, and we love our dogs in West Hollywood, and I love mine. I have 2 rescues personally, and they're just my babies. But, so having, dog parks, enclosed dog parks, maybe separating big dogs from small dogs, this is very, very important. So we really have to look at what the future is going to be, which is happening right as we speak. And our demographics have changed so much that we need to catch up. And that's the problem to me with what our previous council or some of my opponents don't understand, which is that it's not the same city as it was 30 years ago. And when we see the city for what it is today instead of yesterday, then not only will we be thinking about the reality of today, but then we could actually have the opportunity to be forward-thinking and say, how can we actually look at those trends and start being ahead of where the demographics are going and provide services and infrastructural changes that will accommodate where we're going. So in other words, if you have kids that are, let's say, 7 or 8, who in 10 years will be 17, 18 years old, what can we do today to make sure that those people will stay then? And it's the same thing with seniors. There's a lot of people that moved into this city. I'm not young anymore. I don't want to admit it. But my needs have changed since I first came to the city. So I want to age in place here. I don't want to think that I'm going to have to, at some point, have to leave the city for some reason because the city is either unaffordable for me when it comes to the point where I, no longer a working woman, or if the needs, the human service needs that I might need, if something happens to me, I hope it doesn't, but when I get older, but we have a lot of disabled people in our community, we have to provide for what the needs of our residents are. And the changing demographics aren't just families, they're also the LGBT community getting older, people living with HIV/AIDS longer, and what does that mean, and how do we accommodate that and provide? These are the fundamental core values of West Hollywood, and I want to make sure that they stay for as long as I'm alive and living in this city, because I'm not going anywhere. So.
Right. All right, well, I kind of want to shift over to City Hall, which I think itself has faced some issues, I would say, more recently with the council.
Interesting word.
Yeah, some issues, maybe some controversy about the council deputy system, as you know, with accusations of misbehavior. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, and if you would consider reforming the deputy system in any way if you were on the city council.
Great question.
Right.
The controversies that have been going on inside of City Hall show to me a culture of corruption that has taken grip of City Hall. Now, everybody's entitled to a fair and impartial hearing, so in some ways, we all need to wait to comment until the investigations are through. I think that the city should not drag its feet on how long it takes. There's one of my candidates, actually, whose office, one of my opponents, whose office is being investigated right now, and so I think that the citizens, we residents, have a right to know know what exactly the investigation ultimately finds, so that we can make decisions. It would have been nice if it was before the election, and not because of me, but because whoever wins, it's either going to be a victory or a loss for the city, depending on who gets in my opinion.
Right.
And not a victory or a loss for a person. We are just public servants. So to me, I think we have to get to the bottom of these controversies and then make the findings transparent and accessible, and we should all know what the truth is, with a capital T. As far as the deputy system, it was a system that has been debated for a long time, and something clearly broke down. Now, was it a breakdown in personalities? Was it a breakdown between council people? Again, we have to get to the bottom of it. But the deputy system, there have been interesting ideas that I've thrown out. And again, when I get onto council, I would sit down with my fellow council members and pool our ideas and say, well, what are you thinking? What do you think? One of the things that I think would be interesting is to perhaps have where it's sort of an at-large deputy system instead of each council person choosing their own, which sort of can lead to some of the infighting that we've seen, and the accusations are even worse than infighting. It could even be illegal, but we're holding off until we find out. But when you have a pool, what happens is that you could actually interview people for the job, for a particular job. Let's say someone's writing legislation or someone's doing constituent outreach. Those two things require completely different personality types, skill sets, educational background, et cetera, right? And also pay scale, which should be commensurate with what the market value is for profit and nonprofit as well. But the bottom line is that if you did have this pool, you'd actually have people who were experts in their particular field. Mm-hmm. Now they would be servicing not only the council very, very well, but even more importantly, they would be serving the residents very, very well. So that's an idea. And I'd be really interested to hear what my fellow council members would have as their ideas, so that we could find the best way to make sure that what happened this year never happens again. And by the way, this isn't the first year we've had problems with deputies. As we know, a few years ago, John Heilman's office was involved with a scandal with Fran Solomon and her deputy using credit cards and things like that. So we really do have to make sure that the deputies are serving one thing and one thing only, aside from serving their council members, but ultimately council members are serving us, we the residents, and we need to come first, right? So we need to get that. I keep saying I want to take a Swiffer mop into City Hall, clean it up, and make sure that we have access and transparency so that residents can know exactly what's going on the third floor at all times. By the way, we are living in the age of communication. You guys know that better than me.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, right?
Yeah.
And yet, although I'm pretty up on it,
Yeah.
and for an old lady,
Oh, yeah.
and our communication tools are also lagging behind. One of the biggest frustrations that residents have is that they have an issue or they have a problem, and they literally don't know how to even approach City Hall. And it's not a matter that they can't figure it out. Everybody knows where it is. They know how to pick up a phone and call. But the access to being heard, it seems to them that there's a tone deafness in City Hall. And I know that that's true. I have experienced it myself, and I'm a commissioner. So if I'm having that kind of problem, imagine someone who's kind of disengaged and then all of a sudden has a problem. If we're living in the age of communication, we need to have a better communication system that is implemented. I would do it in my first 100 days. It's an easy thing to do. Let's be part of the 21st century already. We're already at 2015.
Yeah.
And let's make communication in West Hollywood catch up to the rest of the world. And I think that that would also alleviate some of the upswell of frustration that residents are feeling on the street.
Right.
Cool.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, it seems like we're almost out of time. We have
Are we
15
really?
seconds
Are you
left. I
kidding?
know.
I didn't even
Time
get to
goes-
public safety
I
and crosswalks. I have
know.
such great
No
ideas.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much for
pleasure.
being on
Thank
the
you
show.
so
Thank you so much for
Appreciate
having me.
it.
You guys are
Thank you.
fantastic.
No problem.
I appreciate it.
No
All right.
problem.
All right.